According to the Federal Railroad Administration, each American requires the movement of about 54 tons of freight each and every year to get the essential goods that we need each and every day. And much of that is by train. Joining me now to talk about the weather's impact on freight rail and Norfolk Southern's push to be more energy efficient is the company's Chief Sustainability Officer, Josh Raglin. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, you're welcome. Great to be with you.
So for people who don't know, what kind of objects are transported by rail?
We transport a little bit of everything related to the automobile industry, to metals, to chemicals, to ag and forest related products, and including intermodal, which is really consumer facing. So that's a lot of your retail goods that are coming and going either by ship or being produced in the United States and moving domestically. So we work very hand in hand with our transportation partners, which includes trucks and also with maritime.
So why are trains critical for being more sustainable? What makes them different from trucks?
Well, not only do we move the goods that move America, but it's also moving them in the most sustainable way. So for example, rail is up to 7 times more efficient than our main competitor, trucking. That means we can reduce emissions 75% on average, and in some cases up to 90%. So to put that in perspective, freight rail moves around 29% of all freight ton miles in the U.S., but only produces 6% of all freight related emissions. Trucking, on the other hand, moves around 40% of freight ton miles, but produces 72% of emissions. And most of that are trips over 500 miles. And that's our sweet spot. So we really have the way of moving product the most efficiently, and it's also good for consumers as well, as you think about the wear and tear in our road system and also traffic congestion.
And we deal with a lot of that traffic congestion here in Atlanta. And we also deal with a lot of different types of weather events. When you're driving a truck, okay, there's storms coming in here. I'm going to maybe avoid those highways.
Yep.
How do you deal with planning for weather events when you're talking about freight rail?
Yeah, so we do a few different things. One is our partnership with AccuWeather. And so that's allowing us to receive near-term and long-term forecasts just specifically for our rail network, which is 19,000 miles long in the eastern 22 states. So we partner with them, we have forecasting, but we also have real-time alerts as well. And so that alerts our people out in the field as we respond to weather-related events. And also very importantly for our Network Operations Center, which is here in Atlanta, that controls all those train movements across the network. So if there's instances where we need to avoid certain areas because of flooding or potential systems, we can reroute trains across different lines on our rail network.
So, we deal with weather events, and we're also planning for the future. Mm-hmm. And a lot of companies have launched initiatives to cut down on their carbon footprint, their greenhouse gas emissions. Your company in 2023 launched its first climate transition plan. Can you tell us more about what are your key pillars of trying to cut down on your carbon footprint for you all and also for your customers that are using your freight rail for shipping?
Yeah, so several things that we're doing internally, first of all, is continuing to decarbonize our own efforts. That's going to be a lot towards locomotives. That's over 90% of our scope 1 and 2 emissions, for example. So a lot of efforts on investing in our locomotive fleet. We've been modernizing over 100 locomotives a year since 2016. We've improved fuel efficiency over 12% just in the last 5 years, for example, and it's at record quarterly fuel efficiency just the last 4 quarters, to put that in perspective. But we're also investing heavily in biofuels, such as biodiesel blends. A 20% blend of biodiesel, for example, can reduce greenhouse gas emissions up to 15%, but it's also reducing particulate matter as well. So we've more than doubled our use of biodiesel just in the last 2 years. And then thirdly is renewable energy. Not only using renewable energy, but also cutting down on our consumption as well. And so those two things together, we've reduced our electricity emissions around 30% just in the last 5 years.
So you're telling me it's not a one solution fits all. It's kind of diversifying many different areas that you're trying to reduce that carbon footprint.
That's right, and we've modeled those levers, and we feel like there's a pathway to reach our near-term target, which is in 2034. But we're also not just stopping there. We're looking at other technologies. We're working with our traditional locomotive OEMs, but also looking outside of that system as well as we think about what are those solutions of the future or those innovations that need to happen.
And one of those innovations for your customers you launched just this year is Railgreen. Can you tell us more about how that works and why your customer base was giving you feedback that that's something they're interested in?
Yeah, so Railgreen relates back to our usage of biodiesel products. I told you that's part of our strategy, and we've been learning from our partners in maritime that have similar programs related to green fuels they're using in their ships. And so, but we were getting an advantage by using biodiesel in our emissions, but we didn't have a credible, transparent pathway to pass that along to our customers. And so now with Railgreen, we partnered with the Smart Freight Center in Amsterdam, 123 Carbon as well. And now we have a verified process to verify our emissions reductions, create Railgreen certificates from that, and now have a legitimate way that we can pass those certificates along with our customers that want to participate in that program.
Are you getting positive feedback, or have you gotten any feedback that customers feel like it's greenwashing?
You know, we've actually had customers asking about this before we even launched. So a lot of our customer network, so think of multinational companies, retailers, a lot of your consumer-facing brands are very incentivized. You know, consumers like us, we want green products, we want green shipping, green solutions. And so we've had a really positive momentum there. Just last week, we made an announcement with the Port of Virginia on creating the country's first Railgreen corridor, going from the Port of Norfolk to the inland port there in the state of Virginia. And we're receiving a lot of positive feedback and customers reaching out to us because of that.
So that's a new initiative. What about your pipeline for the future? Are there any other technologies and stuff that you're experimenting with to make your company even more sustainable?
I would say the one that's probably most exciting recently is we partnered with a small tech company called Remora. And so it's about how can we create systems to actually treat the exhaust. So I actually met Remora, the CEO, 4 years ago. They were working on truck technology. They had 5 employees at the time. Recently I went up to see them in Detroit. They've got 50 employees and they've got $117 million in capital investment. And now they're getting into the rail space. So we announced a pilot project with them. They're creating a capture tender that will follow behind the locomotive, treat the locomotive exhaust. This is going to, reduce the CO2 emissions by 70%.
So trying to carbon capture?
The carbon capture, but at the same time, it's going to reduce the particulate matter and nitrous oxides by 90%. It's a huge benefit for air quality.
I was going to say that's probably a big deal for air quality because your train lines are going through a lot of communities here in Georgia.
Yep, that's right.
Based here in Georgia. Now, speaking of those trains going through a lot of Georgia communities, you have this big effort towards being sustainable, launching your climate transition plan. Are there any outlooks in your future for trying to reduce the amount of toxic materials being transported, or are you focusing on safety in other ways to make sure it's safe for all those communities?
I'd say we've had a lot of focus. We're a very safe industry, and we've even had more focus on safety. I would say a lot of our partnership on technologies related to AI and machine learning. So we launched our digital train inspection portals just within the last 2 years, and that's a great technology for inspecting full trains. 360 view as those trains move at rail speed, so it's 60 miles an hour. And so that's made a huge difference in mainline accidents. And so just this last year, we set the record for the industry in mainline accident derailments, so the lowest that we've seen. And that's in partnership with Georgia Tech Research Institute, which is right here in Atlanta.
Yeah, so you're working on making sure that you're reducing your carbon footprint, but at the same time, you're also evolving technology to keep things very safe.
That's right.
Josh, if you had to give kind of a pitch to Georgians, this is a Georgia-based company. What's the biggest motivating factor for them to support Norfolk Southern going forward?
Yeah, I would say we're a very sustainable company. We chose Atlanta for a reason. Partly it's because it's a logistic hub of the Southeast, and it's also a tech hub. So there's a lot of things that Atlanta and the state of Georgia brings to us. And we've had a long-term presence in the state as well. We've got 4,000 employees. We've got over 1,700 miles of rail network. So we've been in Georgia a long time, and we're now proud to call it our home state and continue to move the goods that move the economy and work with partners like Georgia Ports Authority, for example, or our 1,200 customers in the state to further reduce both environmental impacts and society impacts from freight transport.
Josh Raglin, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Great being here.